So the first thing that we did is we looked at, okay, well, what are the top 10 movies of all time? Because if you want to be the biggest movie star in the world, you're going to have to make the biggest movies in the world. So we said, well, what are the top 10 movies? So we looked at the top 10 movies. We said, well, what are the patterns? What are the patterns in the top 10 movies? And at the time, 10 out of 10 were special effects movies. And 9 out of 10 were special effects movies with creatures. And 8 out of 10 were special effects movies with creatures and a love story. So.
And I love that idea of valuing each hello and goodbye.
Absolutely.
And not taking it for granted or taking it lightly. You never know whatever's gonna happen, right? You just have no idea. And unfortunately, we see it. This is the, there's actually a beautiful, I don't know if we ever talked about this, there's a beautiful piece in the Mahabharata, which is the Gita is a small part of. And one of the students asked the teacher, he said, what's the most amazing thing in the world? Like, what's the most incredible thing in the world? And the teacher responds and says, the most incredible, amazing thing in the world is that we see people leave all around us, but we never think it's gonna be us.
I never.
And it was, when I heard you say that, I was like, that is spiritual self-worth. Like, we live in a world today where self-worth or self-beliefs are all like, I'm the best, like, I own this, like, I'm worthy of everything. Like, of course Nelson Mandela wants to spend time with me. I'm Will Smith. Like, that's material self-worth.
Yeah.
But it's fickle and it's boring and it's so, it has no base to it. It's baseless. Whereas that feeling of like, when, as you said, that when I'm with him or when I was around him, I realized how small I was, but how big I could be. That's spiritual self-worth. One thing you learned from observing the life of Julius Irving and Muhammad Ali.
So Julius Irving was like the man went right in the heart of my childhood. The 76ers won the championship in 1983 in a 4-game sweep of the Lakers. And I would say the single thing with Doc is he was always dignified. No matter what somebody said, no matter what somebody did, the idea that he was just perfectly still and he was an exquisite, well-spoken gentleman. And that balance of those two things I always thought was spectacular. Everything that's ever happened to me in my life that at the time was deeply traumatic and debilitating. You know, there's been only 2 times in my life when I contemplated suicide.
Wow.
You know, there's been 2 times in my life. And the once was when my mother and father separated. When my parents broke up, and I was 12, and that was one of the only, serious times in my life that I contemplated suicide.
And then when I got to know you and Jada and spoke to the family, I realized that you'd taken on a challenge to study a world religion every year. And tell us about that and what you learned along the way. What were some of the traditions that stood out in your journey and what did you learn from them, whether it was the Kabbalah or even Scientology, all those, because you've shared so many beautiful lessons with me from what you've studied. Yeah. And I'd love to pass them on.
So what was, I guess probably in the first 10 years of our marriage, that was me and Jada's bonding, right? So every year we would pick a spiritual tradition and we would study it all the way through.
How did you even start doing that? Because when I heard you did that, I think Jada told me first.
The central problem that has been the focus of my life and everything that I've done has been centered on having a successful love relationship. So I saw my parents when they were growing up, and I hated that my parents' marriage deteriorated. And as young as I can remember, 5, 6 years old, I wanted to be married. I wanted to have a family. I've never been the guy that wanted to do threesomes and groupies. Always wanted to commit and have a single successful relationship. So I am certain and I am committed to being who I am and how I want to be without a craving for someone's approval, right? Because I know their approval doesn't have anything to do with me, right? Yeah. And, sometimes we get stuck in these situations where we're seeking the approval of someone for our self-esteem.
Yes.
Self-esteem is about yourself, right?
Absolutely.
But we start looking to other people for our self-esteem. And, sometimes we find ourselves looking in broken mirrors to get a reflection of ourselves. Life is the greatest teacher there is. You just have to be willing to learn and recognizing that your pain and your suffering is the thing that the universe is poking at. So you recognize that's where you're ignorant.
Yeah.
You wouldn't be having those struggles in those areas if you had a deep, broad comprehension of the fundamental realities of those situations.
Mm-hmm. As I was listening to you, I was thinking about how we're programmed to believe that life is for enjoyment.
Right.
But actually it's for education.
It's for education, yes, absolutely.
And we keep seeking enjoyment in the education.
Yeah, we're looking for what is the pattern, and that's one of the gifts my father stuck me with coming out of childhood.
Yeah, this is one of my favorite parts about talking to you because of this ability to turn those into gifts.
Yeah.
And I want to just emphasize that point to everyone who's listening and watching again, because I think we're living in a time right now where there's a lot of bitterness towards parents and what we received, and rightly so as well. Like some things are, quite hard to deal with that level of trauma, etc. But at the same time, when we start looking at our lives this way, not in a fake way or an ingenuine way, but really start to process some of these things to see the powers that it gave us.
And if you're talking about a husband and a wife, or you're talking about a parent and a child, or a Democrat and a Republican, or a Saudi and an American, whatever, in all of the configurations of human difficulty, at the center of it is almost exclusively a lack of understanding of the other person's perspective. Right?
As I was listening to you, I was thinking about how we're programmed to believe that life is for enjoyment.
Right.
But actually it's for education.
It's for education, yes, absolutely.
And we keep seeking enjoyment in the education.
Yes.
So we think we're in a candy shop, but we're in a classroom.
I call that the poisoned honey scenario, right? You're seeking enjoyment. You want something sweet, and you don't recognize that honey's poisoned, right? It's going to be sweet going down, but it's, the kickback on that thing is something terrible.
Yeah. And we see that in, what you're creating now.
Every moment was so rich. Every time we saw each other, it was, and every time we said goodbye, we made sure it was a good, thorough, full goodbye. Anyway, every time you leave your house could be the last time. You're supposed to be in the richness of your hellos and goodbyes and thank yous, And, so I learned that lesson with my father. And then when he passed, it was easy. You just don't think you're gonna have a chance to call them to tomorrow or next week. And it's like that opportunity with my father changed every relationship in my life. I was so, just felt so unworthy of that. And I just felt unworthy.
like when we think, it's weird, like spiritual life is like, it's teaching you self-worth without having low self-esteem.
Yes, yeah.
But
Yes.
right, you said that.
To deserve his time and attention.
And because you had that, I feel, you've continued in your way to find and he's still involved in your life. And
Yeah,
someone loves
absolutely.
you that much.
Yeah.
They don't stop, like your grandmother. And I've felt every time you've spoken about him that you've brought him into my life just by speaking about him. And now into everyone else's life even more.
Yeah,
for sure.
that's real.
He lives through you. But I want to talk about a few more things before I let you go. I could talk to you forever, and we do that. So I won't do that today.
And I see, like, my father was the base as discipline. And my mother didn't care about anything but education. Like, that you had to learn, grow, study, travel. Like, my mother was really serious about educating the mind. And my grandmother was love and God. My grandmother was that grandmother at Resurrection Baptist Church. And she had, we were doing our Easter recitations and we was at the nativity, So she was that grandmother at the church, and her life was deeply devoted to God and Jesus in the form of loving service. And then as I, grew and as I started to develop that, that heightened sense that started out as defense, as I settled down and, came into a deeper understanding of my power and my desires in the world, it was easier to connect to people in a loving way. It transferred easily from a defense mechanism to an ability to love and care for people.
That's amazing, though, that you were able to process it positively. Yeah. How do you think you were able to, because we've talked about this before when you've talked about your mother, your father, what you learned from them. Tell us a bit about what you learned and how you were able to process it positively and engage with it rather than create a negative story from it. Because a lot of people may see violence and react differently.
I think there's always an aspect of us that when we feel unloved, in any capacity, in any relationship, when we feel unloved, when we feel mistreated, when we feel somehow disrespected, it's a natural reaction to want revenge. And I think that's what happens with most people, specifically in our most vulnerable stages when we're children. It's really hard for the ego to not click into revenge, And, once I discovered that mechanism, once I saw that most of us walk around with.
Yeah.
That, we want revenge against that mistreatment. And that's the paradoxical conflict that we all live in. Yeah. And most of us don't want to hear that. It's like, I'll take my chances with revenge. I'm going to take my chances with punching this dude in the face or cussing this girl out or whatever it takes. And for me, I had such a beautiful example of loving kindness in my grandmother. I want to show what it looks like to be loving and kind and giving and forgiving.
And you hold on to it because somewhere inside of you, you feel you have to be the person to show that person
Yes. Yeah.
the truth. Like you feel like it's
Yes.
your responsibility.
Yes.
And when you kind of put that in your head, you're like, oh, like that's just a plea, a begging.
A begging. Yep.
A literal, like, it's not even a proposal, it's like a demand
It's
for
a
love.
demand.
The reason why I was highlighting the personal aspect of you is that I think that the example that you're setting through who you can be is even more than what you've done.
Mm-hmm.
Phenomenal what you're achieving and what you continue to achieve. But being able to do that with a loving heart, that must be, I mean, how does that feel internally? So when I saw you talking about it when you were in India, I was just like, wow, like, this is amazing. Like, I'm already a huge fan. I love Will Smith. Like, how is Will reading the Gita?
And I remember I was about 12 and I had started rapping. And, you know, so I had my rap books. I had all my little curse words and everything in my rap book. And she never said anything, and she just opened the cover and she wrote a letter to me. Dear Willard, truly intelligent people do not have to use words like this to express themselves. God has given you the gift of words. Be sure to use those words to uplift people. And I was sitting, I was reading that, and just love Gigi.
Yeah.
And, you know, that was part of the reason why I never used profanity in any of my music. Yeah. And it was like she missionized me in that way to make sure that what I was doing was uplifting others, you know. And when you're telling stories, you can always find the part of the story that is a gift for the potential upliftment of somebody that would see it, you know. So, but yeah, she was all God, all love. So what was, I guess probably in the first 10 years of our marriage, that was me and Jada's bonding, right? So every year we would pick a spiritual tradition and we would study it all the way through.
How did you even start doing that? Like, because when I heard you did that, I think Jada told me first, and when I heard you did that, I was just like, it just took me aback because you don't come across that all the time. And I was lucky enough to study world religions. My father started encouraging me when I was about 14 to start reading spiritual books. And I dated a Muslim girl who asked me to read the Quran. That's how I read the Quran, which was a wonderful experience in my life at 16. I read the Bible because we would celebrate Christmas and I'd feel guilty that we celebrated Christmas, but I hadn't read the Bible. Oh, right. So I started going to church on Christmas and then reading about Christ and the Bible, and I just absolutely fell in love with the scripture. And then I was just reading so many different books. And finally I came back to the Gita, which was the book I was brought up with.
And, you know, the concept that someone's reaction to your behavior is theirs and your behavior is yours. And when you try to marry the two, when you try to use the outcome as a measure of the quality of your own being, that is the kiss of death. The way that this material world works, you can do everything right and it still go wrong in terms of outcome. Yeah. And you can do everything wrong and it still goes right
in the outcome.
In the outcome. The outcome is not connected to the quality of your behavior. And that is such a hard idea to digest.
I'm still learning about you. I'm not aware yet of how immersed and obsessed you get with stuff. And then you're like, I've got 2 hours. And I was like, all right, 2 hours a week, 2 hours bi-weekly, 2 hours monthly. You're like, no, 2 hours a day.
2 hours a day.
And I was like, wow, he's real. I was like, he's serious. I was like, wow, he's for real. And then, it was just, it was, and I'd go away and you re-inspired so much of my own study.
And getting our 7 unstuck is a really critical part of being able to interact with other human beings. Because we're painting on everything we hear them say. We're adding our stuck 7 to everything they say, and you just can't get the equation to come out correctly if your calculator's broken.
I love that analogy. That's awesome. I never heard that before. I love that. Yeah. If everyone who goes away listening to this interview, the one thing you remember is that.
Yeah.
What is that broken calculator? What's that number?
Broken calculator.
You keep
what
adding to the equation.
And you're gonna make it be that no matter what is in front of you, your equation's coming up with your broken number.
Yeah.
It's a little piece of that with all of us. So the problem is that when you seek revenge, you destroy yourself. And that's the paradoxical conflict that we all live in. Yeah. Someone has mistreated us. We want revenge, but if we take it, we hurt ourselves more.
It's crazy how it's
right?
designed.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. Tell us about how that's now coming through in the work you're doing, like how you've actually brought this into reality, because sometimes it can feel very heady. But you've really been working hard on taking it out of the head, into the heart, and into the world.
Yeah, and that was one of the things about Aladdin that was so defining for me, you know, and that concept of the sacred clown. I had written that down in one of my books, you know, 5 or 6 years ago. And it's like, at my core, it's either who I am or who I want to be, but it's in there. It's in there really deep. And in playing the genie, it was like, that I was at home, right? That combination of fun, light, silliness, and the imparting wisdom to Aladdin, right? I was like, that's who I want to be in the world. I want to be singing and dancing and being silly and playing and all of that, and then sneaking the ideas in, you know, under the joy. But I had heard that, I think it was the Lakota Indians or something like that, the Native Americans. Right. They had the image of the sacred clown,
which is often considered negative.
Yeah, yeah. But it's like I connected to it. It's like, oh, that's right. That's what the singing and dancing and all of the joy and all of the smiling and all of that is for. It's just a beautiful conduit for the ideas. And, you know, that's just at my core. I'm happiest in that space. It's one mindset. And then after I got the flag to the hill a couple of times and kept getting the flag to the hill and realized that you don't feel good and you've scorched earth, you know, around you, and you're like, nobody's really happy, you know. And then I started to have to question that mindset. But it's really hard to get people to let go of the attack and defend achievement mindset and trust the care and concern for your fellow humans as a way of creating higher production.
Yeah, that's beautifully explained, because it's the perception of the right reaction.
Yes.
That's where we get lost, is that for us, going back to what you said at the beginning, you were like, there's no such thing as a bad experience. We're looking at the result of our activities as a signal of how well we're living.
Yes, absolutely. It would be that you have to repeat back what you heard the other person say before you're allowed to say what you think. That the law is you're not allowed to respond to what someone said until you repeat back what you heard, and the person has multiple opportunities. No, that's not what I meant. And until you repeat back accurately what the person said, you don't get to talk.
And lived for long enough.
And solved, you know.
Yeah.
And at the core of all of the, you know, the spiritual teachings that I've ever studied, at the core of all of the ideas, how you treat your neighbor is central. Yet somehow people manage to twist, you know, in all faiths and all backgrounds,
Totally.
people do unto others as you would have them do unto you is very clear. Mm-hmm. If you ask yourself that question, well, in this situation, how would I have them do unto me? And you did that.
You start to realize that the external view of like, Will's charismatic and he's cool, and you start to realize like, yes, but that is underpinned with just hard work. Yeah. And I think that that's a real awakening that a lot of people don't get to experience when they see you on a big screen. Because you don't see all of that there. I have to share this because it's what I find, and this is the only time I get to tell everyone, is, you know, like for me to see you on set, busy, like, you know, I mean, for anyone who's never been on set, it can be a stressful environment. It's high pressure, like you're acting, you got to know your lines, you got to interact. Will, with that, you know, without any further ado, I just want to say I'm grateful, I'm humbled, I'm so happy to have spent so many special moments with you over the past year. This sounds romantic now, my wife's gonna get worried again. but I mean it, man.
She's like, you've been spending a lot of time with Will. And then once you clear yours and your vision gets clean and purified, and you approach a person from a purified space, things get a whole lot easier.
My wife's gonna get worried again.
You've been spending a lot of time with Will.
Yeah, she's never felt uncomfortable about my relationship apart from with The only time she's doubted me is like, oh, another trip with Will. That's what this time she came along. And also when you sit down, and I've probably watched, I'm trying to think, I think I've watched every interview you've ever done, like over the years. Before I met you, when I met you, I'm always talking to you. I'm like, oh, I remember you said this 5 years ago or 10 years ago you were saying this. And when I'm sitting down with you now, I'm thinking, you know, I remember the first time I properly met you was at Willow's birthday a few years back. And everyone was it was Willoween. I was like, oh, maybe that's Will, maybe that's not, I didn't know. And you said that, and I was just like, what? I was like, it just, two of my worlds collided. I grew up watching Fresh Prince every day. I knew every pickup line. I used every pickup line because of you.
There's a brutal reckoning at the end of that.
But the amazing thing about you is you've been on that path in that direction. I think people sometimes see these flips where they're like, oh yeah, now that you are rich and successful and famous, now you're going this way. But actually, from our conversations and how you've shared with the family, or even when we've worked with some of the friends in your life, it's like, this has actually been a long process.